Well, bright good morning to everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning for the Plants, Pests, and Pathogens workshop. We've got a fun morning planned for you. Just quick reminders on some of the basic housekeeping stuff. If you haven't already done an audio setup, please do that because we'd love for you to chime in and be able to hear you. So if you just go up to the menu bar, press Tools, select Audio from the drop-down menu, and then click on Audio Setup Wizard, you'll be able to be taken through a couple of steps that will make sure that you can hear us well and that we can hear you. Speaking of which, can you hear me? Can you raise your hand, or you can tell me out loud people can hear? Yes, excellent. Thank you. Okay. Everything you type in the chat box is visible to all of the moderators, so there is no such thing as private chatting on this Illuminate session. In order to cut back on the feedback, if you'll just leave your microphone turned off unless you're talking, that'll really help us. Your audio button is in the bottom left corner. It's a picture of a microphone, and it turns yellow when your microphone is on, and it's grayed when it's off. So if you just leave it off unless you're asking a question or giving an answer or talking, that'd be great. Thanks. This is going to be recorded, and it will be available for you to view later if you'd like. Request that all agents sign up on LMS to get continuing education credit for the workshop, and that you take time to fill out the evaluation. We really need your help in both providing us feedback on how to improve the session and also giving us documentation that we can present as we're looking for resources to continue the program. I'd also ask that you go to this Google Doc to record your attendance. We've switched the way we're doing that this year. Let me just show you real quickly how that works. Actually, never mind, I'm not going to do that. So to click on the link, you should have access to the Google Doc, and it gives you the opportunity to record the number of master gardeners, the number of agents, and the other people who are participating. And we really need that to document how many people are participating and benefiting from the program. So thank you for making the time to do that. We have a page that gives you lots of information about plants, pests, and pathogens. It's got links to previous programs. It's got handouts. It's got, for agents, it's got links to the PowerPoints from previous programs. It's got information on Illuminate, all kinds of things, everything you need to participate in plants, pests, and pathogens, as well as the upcoming schedule of events and who's going to be on, when, and where. It's got the links to log in. So this tiny URL at the bottom is the link to the main page for plants, pests, and pathogens. Please take advantage of that if you need to confirm what the login is or who's going to be speaking next or any of that sort of stuff. Here's the program for today. We have Ann Edwards, Donna Teasley, and actually Steve Bambera is going to be stepping in for Mark Blevins, who's not able to join us. Peter Hertl is our guest speaker, going to be talking about organic management of vertebrate pests. We have Showstopper Plants, and Danny Lauderdale has agreed to step up since Mark can't be with us today. And then our David Stephan in Entomology and Mike Munster with Plant Pathology, and I think Sean's going to be joining us as well, maybe even Emma. So lots of exciting things happening today. Let me introduce Lee J. Hicks, who is our information technologist. Welcome, Lee J. Thank you so much for all the support that you give us.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to provide.
I'm going to turn it over to you and let you do the kind of the introduction of Illuminate and figuring out where everybody's from.
All right, sounds great. Good morning, everyone. As Lucy said, my name is Lee J. And just an overview of Illuminate. On the top left, you have your participant window, and that lets you know who's in the room and who's talking and things like that. Right below the participants, you see a set of smiley faces and hand claps. You can click those if you're in agreement or if you have a question and you want to give a general applause. To the bottom right of the participant window, there is a check box and a green check and a red X. If you'll click on that green check for me, just let me know that you see it. Okay. Looks like it's coming in very well. That check and X can also be turned into A, B, C, D, E by our presenters. So if they tell you to answer a question, that's the general area that you'll look to give your response. Below that area is the chat window. Feel free to type in a question that you might have, a technical question or a question for one of the presenters, and we'll make sure that your question is seen. So if you don't have a microphone, that's not a problem. Just type here in the chat window. What I want to do now is find out where everyone is. If you look to the left of this map, there are tools on the whiteboard. One of them looks like a magic wand. It's what I call it. It is a red starburst with a black line. If you'll click on that, then you can click on where you are located on the map. All right. Good job. If you have any questions, again, type in the chat area, and I'm going to turn it back over to Lucy.
Great. Thanks, Lee J. Okay, our first agent up is Ann Edwards, who is going to have a lightning finger and take you through really quickly through PowerPoint presentations that she's put together on preparing rain barrels, and talk with you a little bit about what's happening in Carteret County. Ann is the horticulture agent and the county director in Carteret County. Welcome, Ann.
Thanks, Lucy. Where did you get that picture of me in the apple orchard? Quickly, what's going on down here in Carteret County? For those of you who are a little behind us in season, what's coming your way is bees, and more bees. Carpenter bees have been a real big issue the last week. Lots of calls about those. So get your sheet out about carpenter bees. Pollinator bumblebees in greenhouses have also been a topic with our commercial growers. And then our bee swarms have started, our honeybee swarms. So lots of bees coming your way and to get ready for. Our biggest response to programs this spring, interestingly, down here have been, we don't have a livestock agent, so we call any small animals that are raised in small yards by homeowners part of our horticulture program. They're garden animals. We've had a huge response to chicken programs, 45 people attending chicken programs in our county this spring, and 25 people attending a backyard goat program. So that's kind of an interesting twist to horticulture in that these backyard garden livestock are becoming a big deal. A quick thing about chicks, if you have embryology going on in your county right now and there are teachers and kids who want to take some of those chicks home, first of all, of course, if they're not the breeds for egg laying, they don't want to take them home because they're going to be horrified at what they grow into and how quickly and what they have to do with them. Even if they are egg laying breeds, though, it's real important that they not take those home to raise them, because at least half, if not more, are going to turn out to be roosters that they'll then have to destroy. So just a little thought. We have 7 boxes full of close to 100 chicks in our office right now, so that's what brought that up. Okay, very quickly, we are very dry here on the coast already this spring, and it's dry springs that lead to big turnouts in our rain barrel workshops. When we have a wet spring, no one comes in the summer to rain barrel workshops. A dry spring, they do. Just wanted to give you all a heads up that I do have it's just a real simple, practical rain barrel PowerPoint that I'm happy to share with anyone. It is nothing but how to build one, and it goes very detailed, exactly what pieces of equipment you need, how you put them together. It's useful. It can be printed as a series of slides and handed out, or can be presented at a workshop to show people how. This particular setup of the faucets, we have now had on some rain barrels for 5 years, and they are holding solid and doing really well. So just a little quick update on what I can share with anyone who wants. Thanks, Lucy.
It would help if I turned my microphone on. Sorry. Next up is Donna Teasley. She's the Horticulture Extension Agent in Burke County. Welcome, Donna.
Thanks, Lucy. Glad to be here. Well, the things that are going on in Burke County right now, the big thing is that tomorrow is Master Gardener Graduation Day. Yay. I'm not sure who that's the biggest day for, the Master Gardeners or for me. But anyhow, we have 25 graduating tomorrow, and we're all thrilled about that. You know, Anne, I got my first swarm call yesterday, so the bees are swarming here, the carpenter bees are out. All of those things are happening here too, but we've had a wet spring, so the rain barrels are not going to be coming out quite yet for us. But anyhow, we have lots of weed calls this time of year. You know, the winter annuals and then the summer annuals are just getting started and everything. But today I wanted to talk about something that isn't particularly a thrilling subject, but let me talk to you about the way we handle it here, and that is grubs. And here in Burke County, we see a lot of Japanese beetles and then the green June beetle. And I start getting those calls in January if the weather's nice. You know, even up here we can have some 70-degree weeks in January sometimes. And I start getting calls about skunks and things like that in people's yards, and they're just horrified to find out that most likely they're there looking for grubs. And, of course, they want to do something about it right then. And I think with the grub problem, that's one of the main things I see is that when they see they have the grubs, they want to do something right then. And, of course, generally that's not the time that you can do things about grubs. So they start calling me about, if you look at that picture up in the left-hand corner, they can't decide whether they've got brown patch or they've got grubs, and then we try to explain to them to dig a little and see if they do have grubs in their lawn. And usually they do. We usually have a pretty healthy crop of one or the other or both here. But one of the things that I have tried to do with a lot of the hardwares and garden centers and things like that around here is I've tried to get to know these folks and tried to educate them about not only grubs, but other things too. And I've tried to make them understand about the timing of the products that they put out. You know, I had a guy call me last week, and he had grubs, and he had just put out 2 bags of Dialox. Well, you know, that was just a total waste of time and money for him. And, you know, then you have to be the bad guy and said, well, I'm sorry, you wasted your money there. And so what we try to do is every spring I will go through and meet with the employees of the garden centers. A lot of times they'll set up and just let part of their people come in at one time, and we'll talk about things like the grubs, and I will try to explain well, like this next, and we've all seen this particular chart here about the life cycle, and I try to show them why certain products work at certain times of the year and then they don't work at other times of the year. And even though I would rather use chemical names, I find that in this particular instance with the garden center people and with the clients that call in, I really do use some brand names. And one of the things I recommend the most are the Bayer products because they're so accessible. About everybody has them. They're easy to find, and so I mostly recommend the Bayer 24-hour grub control and then the Bayer season-long grub control. Of course, one is a curative and the other is a preventive. But the thing that I have found with the grubs and with other things is that if I go in and I will put something on an index card that they can carry around in a shirt pocket or in their back pocket, and they can pull it out. It's not a lot, but it's just enough to help them with that customer. And if they can pull that card out and they'll look and see, you know, that in July they shouldn't sell the 24-hour grub control, they should sell the season-long grub control. That really seems to help them. I don't give them a lot more information than that. I just say, this time of year sell them this time of year sell them this. And it works really well for me, and I think that by the time that these garden center employees do this 5 or 6 times, they don't need the card anymore. And so I feel like that they have learned something that will carry them throughout the season. And it also helps me because I know that whenever I send a client out to get a product, that they're getting the right thing. I do the same thing with my garden, my vegetable garden recommendations. I will go through and I will try to find brand names of the things that are suggested in the Ag Chemicals Manual, and I will get this all written down and what insects they control or what diseases they control, and I will get those out to the garden centers, and I'll say, this is what I'm recommending. If you want to sell it, you need to have this on your shelves by such and such a time, and I will even go in and give some workshops to the employees about that, and that helps because you know, nothing is worse than to either do a newspaper article or talk to somebody on the phone and recommend a product, and then the next couple of days they call you back and they're mad because they can't find the product anywhere. So most of the hardwares and garden centers have found out around here that if they will carry if they will try to get on their shelves what I'm recommending, they will sell these products. So that's sort of what I'm working on right now. We're trying to get the garden centers lined up with their products for the upcoming vegetable gardening season. So that's sort of what's going on here in Burt County, and that's all I've got.
Donna, thanks. It would be great to be able to share the work that you're doing and putting together those cards and the talking points things that you've got. Maybe that's something that we could put up on ncsugarden.com to share with other agents around the state, even if it's just as a model and they would have to figure out in their area and their timing. That's so I think would be really helpful. Thank you.
You're very welcome, and I'll try to get that up.
Okay. Next up, we have Steve Bambera, who will be presenting some work that Mark Blevins put together. Mark was scheduled to present this morning and then was not able to join us. So our knight in shining armor, Steve Bambera, stepped up to the challenge. Steve, welcome.
Yes,
thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Whenever you guess. Okay, so let's see. I have looked at this just a few minutes ago, and we'll see what Mark had in line for everybody. Apparently, they're having some ground nesting bee issues in that county, and we've seen them here in Raleigh also. So I'm pretty sure that everybody is seeing these things. Now, we've had them out probably, I would say, at least a month or so, whenever the temperatures started warming up. It's not all the same species. There are ground nesting bees of different species. And these, again, are not like honeybees. They don't have one big colony. All those little holes are individual. And people are going to call, and I've had these calls too this year, in a bit of a panic, and they are concerned about swarming, and they're concerned about stinging, and so on. If there's a possibility that you can calm them down enough that they will accept what you tell them, that they are not likely to sting them, and that it's going to be a short-term issue, and that they are in fact beneficial, then that's great. Some people still don't like them and want things to do. Ant powder and all that stuff is not the way to handle it. We have an insect note on that. If you go to the insect note page, insects.ncsu.edu, and go to the ornamentals and the turf spot, we have a page on that. And so there are some cultural things to try first, if at all possible, such as heavy watering or mulching and so on and so forth. So if you can get them to accept the fact that these are not terrible things that are going to hurt them, then that's great. So here's a picture of the insect note, and again, you can get that off the general insect note page. Apparently, also in Gaston County, there are lots of turf questions coming in, and people want to do stuff. I'm sure your county is no different, but they want to do things at the wrong time. It's way too late for putting in cool season turf, or overseeding anyway for cool season turf if you have a warm season turf. And probably your average consumer doesn't even know which turfs are warm season and cool season, and that is kind of the point, I guess, to start with your education. So obviously you can't grow a cool season turf in the middle of the summer and vice versa. So it's too late to be doing overseeding, and it's too early for seeding those warm season turfs. So apparently some people who've been putting out centipede seed, it hasn't worked for them. So they're going to have to wait a little bit. And then we had some comments earlier about annual weeds and things like that. So now it's time to start looking at some of these things. The trampweed and henbit and the chickweed, those are all out in full force. Again, that's you know, they do. He says they can no longer be ignored, and that's pretty well true. I'm not a weed expert, and Mark has put this resource up here, Turf Files. If you are not familiar with it, it's got everything you ever wanted to know about turf and a whole lot more, basically. So that Turf Files resource is there. If you can't Google it, at some point we'll put in the URL in the window. But there's just all sorts of stuff, the alerts and so on, and clues about when to do things, etc. You can look through this and pick your weeds. That is, you can help identify them and then get some control measures that might be applicable to your particular site or your particular problem, or your client's particular problem, I guess I should say. So also, besides the weeds, Mark says you can pick your friends, and that being the particular types of turf that you are interested in growing. And here's just the tall fescue page, probably the most dominant type of turf that's out there that people are growing anyway. And I'd have to say probably being grown improperly in the most part. But it'd be worth a person's time to go and check out the requirements for some of these turf issues, etc. So Mark's also pointing out here that you can control your weeds, but you can't control your friend's weeds, and there are some weed issues out there that we also want to be aware of, those things that you can't do, and well, maybe you can do something, but maybe you can't anyway. So just be aware of those issues that are probably going to be a long-term problem for you if you have seeds blown in from the field next door or the neighbor next door or so on and so forth. So that's another issue. And lots of this stuff is on Turf Files. All right. Again, not being the turf expert, if you have any turf questions, I'm going to let you defer those to our next speaker. And that's Peter Hertl. He's a research assistant here in the Department of Entomology. He has got loads of experience here on turf, but on all the insects that are pests or non-pests in turf, but also he is our go-to guy whenever we get questions on some of the non-insect pests. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Peter.
Thank you, Steve. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today and tell you a little bit about vertebrate pest control in the landscape. And essentially, I'm going to be talking about organic management of vertebrate pests, which is what I was asked to speak about. And what I would like to do is limit my comments today about moles and voles, which are two of the most common subjects in vertebrate pest control. And if we get through that and take care of the questions on those subjects, I'll also be happy to answer questions on other types of vertebrate pests. Okay. Now, the bottom line on moles and voles is this. Moles and voles are both small mammals, but they're very often confused by the public. And as with any kind of pest control, effective management requires not only the proper identification of the pest, but then to have an understanding of pest biology, of pests that you're dealing with. So to that end, what I'd like to do in the course of this presentation is contrast moles and voles And I'll be doing this in some detail, and especially the more pragmatic aspects with regard to dealing with these pests. But a couple of points I want to make right up front, and that these are both similar sized small mammals, but really that is very much where the similarity ends. And essentially, moles are insectivores, and they eat meat. And although they do cause extensive damage, especially in turf, but even in some landscape beds of occasion, they eat meat. They are not plant-damaging pests, or if they do plant damage, it's through mechanical damage through tunneling rather than actually eating the plants. On the other hand, voles, with a V, are rodents, and they do eat plants as the primary part of their diet, and so they're doing damage directly to the plants that we grow. So one of the first things that we need to deal with when you speak about wildlife control that is much different than most of our other pests. When you're dealing with diseases or insects or weeds, nobody is ever going to give you any problem for pulling a weed or smashing an insect or spraying a disease. But when we come to wildlife, wildlife is a completely different subject under the law. And wildlife is protected by North Carolina state law, and there's a number of statutes of protection. But the bottom line is that I want to start out with moles. And the legal status of moles is that they are classified as wildlife. Now, some people think that this is some sort of special category for moles, and that's just absolutely not the case. Most every kind of wildlife in North Carolina, all birds, most birds, most fish, most snakes, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, all of these animals are protected under the law. And of course there are exceptions, such as the game species, where you get a hunting license and you're allowed to shoot deer in season and so forth. But the bottom line is that moles are classified as wildlife. They are a non-game species. They are protected. And in order to do anything about moles, and with wildlife, the way this is usually phrased, I forget the exact technical phrasing under the law, but essentially taking is any possessing, capturing, killing, or anything that you do with wildlife other than looking at it through a pair of binoculars generally requires a permit. Now, in the case of moles, if you want to deal with a mole problem on your site, the bottom line is that you must have a permit. The type of permits that you get for this are wildlife depredation permits, and they are available from the Wildlife Commission, North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, and they're also available from wildlife damage control agents. And we can talk more about permits as time allows at the end of the presentation. Now, the legal status of voles with a V. Well, from what I just said, not surprisingly, voles are also categorized as wildlife. However, the voles that cause damage to landscape plants have been declared as pests, primarily because of the extensive agricultural damage they do. Therefore, they are not protected, and no permit is needed to deal with vole problems. So, moles technically require a permit. Voles, no permit is needed to deal with vole problems. Now, let's speak about voles first, because these are certainly creatures of significant agricultural and landscape concern. Voles are rodents like rats and mice. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to call them lazy diggers. Although they can dig perfectly well, I'm contrasting these with moles, and so I'll be talking more about their lazy digging status later. Essentially, as far as identifying them, voles look very much like mice, and as a matter of fact, they're often called mice. These are some of the alternative names for our different species of voles. But they have, one of the characteristics that separates them from moles with an M is that they have little mouse feet. When you look at the feet of a vole, They look just like the feet of mice and other small rodents. They are not particularly modified for digging or anything like that. Now, voles eat plants, and this is why they cause significant landscape and garden issues. And these can vary over the course of the season because as there is a greater or lesser abundance of food in the landscape, they are greater or lesser attracted to eating our landscape and garden plants. Now, as rodents, one of the key aspects of voles that separates them from voles, but one of the key aspects that also makes them a tremendous pest, is they are tremendously prolific. Voles breed at about 1 month of age, about 35 days, at 40 days after birth. Voles can breed and essentially producing the next generation of young. Because they breed at an early age, they can have not only the ones that are born this year, but the ones that were born in previous years can have several litters a year. And these are between, their average I believe is 2.8 or about 3 young per litter, but can range up to 6 per litter. And they can have 6 or maybe even 7 litters per year, depending on the species. Well, this combination of early breeding and having several litters per year causes voles to be in very, very high populations. And these high populations are not uniform every year. Voles occur in population cycles, like many mammals do, with high populations every 3 to 5 years. Unfortunately, we're not able to use this understanding that they're cyclic to our advantage. In other words, if we had a good vole year last year, we can't say that we're going to have a bad vole year this year or something like that. Or we can't say, well, 3 years from now we're going to have a vole problem. Weather and food supply and many other disease factors and things like that affect the population. So this cyclic nature is not very useful as far as prediction goes. Now, voles in North Carolina. Well, we have 4 species statewide. 2 of them are montane, essentially forest-dwelling species of no interest to us. And 2 of these species, which are significant in the landscape and agricultural setting. One of these is the pine vole, also known as the woodland vole, and the meadow vole, also known as the meadow mouse. And essentially, the pine vole is a statewide species. The meadow vole is almost a statewide species, but they are more of a northern species, and therefore they're more prevalent in the Piedmont and the mountain part of the state, or the western part of the state. And really, we do not find meadow voles we don't find meadow voles in the southeastern portion of the state. Now, of these 2, the pine vole by far is the species that is most often found when there's complaints about plant damage in the landscape. So what I'm going to do is I will be talking about the meadow vole as I go along, but I'm mainly going to be directing my comments towards pine vole and how to deal with pine vole problems. I will mention this about the meadow vole. I mentioned that voles in general are very prolific. Well, one of the things about the meadow vole that's very much of interest is that it is considered one of the most prolific mammals in the world. And when I talk about voles can be at high population levels, voles, you may just have a few voles per acre, but voles can get up to populations as high as 100 per acre. So that's why sometimes we have significant agricultural landscape problems with it. Now, of course, oftentimes when you have pest problems, you don't have the pest in hand, and that's often the case with wildlife problems. And there are some significant differences between pine vole and meadow vole damage. And of course, the damage is usually what you have that you're able to access and view, and it serves as a source for identification of which species you have. Now, as far as the pine vole is considered semi-fossorial, and And that means that they spend most of their time digging and under the ground, and therefore the damage from pine voles primarily occurs to the underground roots and stems of plants. So when you see damage underground, that's almost certainly pine vole damage. Now, meadow voles will dig holes, but they spend most of their time above the ground, and they will make trails through meadows and so forth, and they can dig, but most of their damage is going to be to stems above the ground. And this alone, although the pine vole damage may extend above the ground, the meadow vole damage may extend a little bit below the ground, generally you can quite easily tell the difference between which species you have just on the basis of the damage. Now, pine voles, I mentioned that they're semi-fossorial, and they do dig holes, and they're perfectly good diggers. We'll talk about lazy digging here in a moment. But one of the signs that you have pine voles in the landscape are when you start seeing little holes, and these are essentially quarter-sized holes, often found at the base or very close to landscape plants in beds. And these, many of you are familiar with mammals digging, and you usually see a pile of soil right around the hole. Usually with voles, you do not see any evidence of fresh digging with the holes. And I think what they do is that they're burrowing along and they kind of pop up. But one of the things about vole holes is you normally do not see a pile of soil associated with them. It's just more or less a hole in the landscaped area. Now, very often where these come up and they're in succulent plants, one of the things that you may see is a small area around the hole that looks like something ran a microscopic lawnmower around and clipped off all the plants. And this would be if the hole came up in clover or some other nice succulent plant. And what this is, moles don't really like to come out where they're exposed to predators, and if they can feed right near that hole, that's what they like to do. And that's why the holes are often found very near the landscape plants. And they do feeding underground, but they also come up, and they will feed on herbaceous materials above the ground. So if you see a hole and you see a clipped off succulents right around succulent vegetation right around the edges of the holes, that's a sure sign it's voles. Now, another sure sign of voles is when you have objects laying out in the landscape and you lift them up and you find half tunnels. And this is why I call voles lazy tunnelers, because while moles will dig and they make their own tunnels actually pushing up the soil, we'll talk about that later, voles will use surface objects as the top of their tunnels. And this is true if you have landscape pavers, buckets that have been sitting around for a while, pieces of wood, pieces of metal, and what they will do is they will burrow under these and use that surface object as the top of their tunnel. So that's why I call them lazy tunnelers. They certainly can tunnel, but they like to dig through soft materials, and they very often use surface objects as the top of their tunnel.
Peter, can you take any questions? What distinguishes a vole from a mouse?
Okay, well, they are very similar, and
repeat the question, because they can.
Okay, yes. Okay, I was asked to take the question, what distinguishes a vole from a mouse? And most of the classification of small mammals is based on skull characteristics, and I would say that generally mice have longer tails. They have more prominent, bulgy eyes, and they have more prominent ears. But other than that, we start getting into some pretty serious levels of classification. Voles are generally brown and dark. There is one of the differences between meadow voles and pine voles is that they do have tails of different length. But I will say that any vole tail is much shorter than a tail on any mouse. So I would say tail length, would be one of the key characteristics that you could focus on. Also, most mice have very prominent, obvious eyes. Now, you can certainly see the eyes on meadow voles, especially, without any problem. They have perfectly good eyes, but those would be two distinguishing features. But the bottom line is that rather than get too heavily into the classification or identification of these different mammals, is that the key element here is where people are going to be concerned about whether, because there will also be mice on site where there are voles, but mice in general do not do plant damage. And so what we're really dealing with here are small mammals that do damage of some sort to the landscape. And so one of the key elements, I would say, as far as our discussion goes, is that voles actually do damage to the plants, and this is not generally something that you have to worry about with mice. Okay. Now, generally the way people find out, on that damage note, the way that people generally find out that they have voles is on a warm day you'll look out and you'll see a plant that appears to have a wilt disease, or maybe one that it looks like you missed it with the hose or something like that, and the leaves will all be drooping down, and you go over there to check out and see what the situation is, and the next thing you know, you're holding that plant in your hand. And that's because all the roots have been chewed off the plant. And what is shown here in the photograph is an Elaeagnus out of a friend of mine's yard. And as you notice, is a fair-sized Elaeagnus. And you'll notice that the below-ground portions of the roots are completely eaten off, as is the bark. And you'll notice that that bark is also eaten off a little bit above where you would normally expect the mulch line, and that may be another issue that I'll be talking about here shortly, which is how to mulch when you have vole problems. Now, when you take a look at this damage a little more carefully, what you'll notice is in the lower right-hand corner here are small, irregular scratch marks in areas where the bark and root surface material has been removed. And those little scratch marks, of course, evidence of the teeth of voles, the little rodent teeth, where they have been gnawing. And if you see this situation where the roots have been chewed off, the plant has wilty characteristics, and that plant pulls right out of the ground, and you see that it has these little teeth marks in it, that's a sure sign that you have voles. And of course, this is below ground damage, and so what we're talking about here is the primary pest, which are the pine vole. Now, one thing I would say on this note is that if you do expect that you have vole damage, I would not necessarily pull that plant out of the ground, because sometimes this is partial damage, and that that the plant may recover. I did, in fact, have a Abelia in my own yard that was damaged, and I thought that it was dead, but it did with watering. It did recover, and looks quite good to this day. Now, I'm going to be talking about a little bit about what you do to deal with vole problems, but I want to mention a very important principle in dealing with wildlife, and that's this. If wildlife, and I mean this is virtually any kind of wildlife problem you're dealing with in the landscape, if the wildlife found the site desirable the first time, and essentially what this means is that it found it desirable in terms of quantity of food that it could eat, places that it could hide or nest, and a water supply, well, if it's finding those things there, then removal may not provide a long-term solution. It may provide a short-term solution, but it's not addressing the problem long-term. And if you're having significant vole problems, you might be able to knock them down for a short period of time, but they're very prolific and they will come back. And this is true of most problem pests. So what we generally like to talk about is a little bit of habitat modification to deal with modifying the habitat so it's a little less desirable for the pest. Now, one of the first things for moles, I mentioned I'd be talking about mulch, and probably well over 25% or more of vole problems could be avoided by proper mulching. Now, in the photograph, you see some examples right here from NC State, unfortunately, of poor mulching, where mulch is piled up significantly against the bark of the plants well above the soil surface. Now, I need not tell a bunch of horticultural agents about the many reasons not to do this, including potential for disease, the potential for insect damage. This is just not very good management. But another thing that this leads to, I mentioned that voles don't like to come out in the open. They do not like to expose themselves to predators. And when mulch is piled up along the bark of trees or any other landscape plant, what it does is it exposes that bark to a nice secret place for moles to remove that bark out of sight and out of mind, and without being able to have any sort of control by predators or anything else. So one of the first things to do where there are vole problems is immediately commence proper mulching. And essentially, the thickness of this mulch is not really a question. It's where it's near the bark. So the first thing is pull the mulch. Pull the mulch back from the bark of the plant down to the soil surface. And it's just a ring of getting that out, 6 inches or so, means that the voles have to come out in the open unless they're approaching from below the soil, which is a different matter we'll address. And that way you avoid having the voles being able to approach the above ground bark of the plants. So that's the first thing, proper mulching. Many good reasons to do it. Vole control is another one. Now, barriers in plant selection are probably two of the best methods to approach long-term vole control. And the first thing I'd like to talk about here, we're going to talk about plant selection now, is avoid plants voles don't like to eat, which that's pretty obvious, and use plants that voles don't like to eat. Now, on that note, I'll go to this next slide. I really don't like showing lists of plants, and here's the reasons why. First of all, this is a microscopic list of problem plants. The lists of plants that voles like to eat would fill up this slide and several more. There's a large number of plants, and of course, plants we use in landscape vary by region, they vary by state, and so forth. So there's a long list of plants that voles like to eat. So you don't really even need to look at the problem plants unless you're trying to plant non-problem plants in the landscape. But essentially, they're almost impossible to avoid if you're doing any sort of normal landscape plantings. Now, the main point here is whether the voles at any particular site, because this does vary quite a bit by region, whether you're having plant damage or not. So here's what I'd say. If you are having damage with a certain type of plant, and let me assure you, they do love bulbs, they do love hostas, and I have a friend here in Raleigh who's had significant damage to camellias as well. If you are having plants that are damaged by voles, one of the first things as far as plant selection goes is not to replace those plants with the same plant, because if they damage the first one, yes, they're going to damage the next one too, unless you do something. Now we'll talk about how that can be approached here in a moment. Now, non-problem plants. Well, there are plants that voles absolutely don't like to eat, and many of the plants in the Amaryllidaceae and the high anthenoid plants essentially have things in their roots that are either unpalatable or toxic. And these would include daffodils, bluebells, and narcissus are three that they will not eat. I will mention, as a little side note here, that bluebells, which I'm speaking specifically of the English bluebell, was introduced from Europe. The English bluebells the roots of those were used to make a rodenticide back before we had our modern rodenticides. In other words, this was the roots of bluebells were used to manufacture a natural or organic rodenticide back before we had more formal products years ago in Europe. So those three at least are safe. Now, there are many other lists out on the internet that you'll see of what they'll lists of vole-resistant plants. I add this. Use those lists with caution. See what research went into them, or whether they just picked some plants that they were trying to sell, or they never saw any vole damage on, or whatever. Because I have definitely seen things on those lists that are on the lists of vole vole damaged plants. So what I'd say is essentially that daffodils, bluebells, and narcissus, those are a pretty limited plant list there. What I would say is I'm not saying don't go to those lists, but just use them with caution. And of course, many of these things on these plant lists aren't even going to be appropriate for your area or region of the state anyway. So some selection is going to have to be used. But do try to see if there was any research put into the particular list that you're looking at. Okay, now barriers. Of course, we can't just rely on plant selection, but barriers is another good way and a very effective way to avoid some of these vole problems. And what I want to focus on here is the use of anti-vole soil amendments, which include gravel, volcanic rock, Vole block, which is a commercial product, and it's essentially exactly the same as Permatil. It's the same company that produces this. It's a crushed shale product. As far as I know, there are not a lot of competing brands on the market. Vole block is the only commercial product I know that essentially what they're saying is use this for voles, to prevent voles. But now I want to go back to the lazy tunneling. And voles are lazy diggers, and they have these little mouse feet. And what they really don't like is they don't like to burrow through anything that's hard, sharp, or angular, like gravel or shale or any of these types of things. I mean, broken glass would be another thing you could add to the list, but if you're going to put broken glass in the soil, you're never going to get rid of that. Don't ask me to come and work in your garden at that point. So Vole block is a pretty reasonable product, and Permatil, which it's been used as a soil amendment for years and years. I don't have any stock in this company, but I will mention that this crushed shale product is mined here in North Carolina, and so if you're into the buy local sort of thing, or you want to support North Carolina as far as products produced here, that this company actually does mine these products here, and that this Vole block and Permatil work extremely well. And I'll show you how to use those here in a moment. Two other barriers that can be used are wire fences and tubes, and close mowing. Now, close mowing isn't really a barrier, but essentially it is in the sense that voles don't like to come out in open areas, and especially when you have meadow vole problems, close mowing at the surface opens that area up and prevents not really just the meadow vole, but cotton rats, and we have a lot of other small mammals out there too. It will prevent them from feeling quite so comfortable to approach and feed on the above-ground portions of plants. So let's talk a little bit about using these physical barriers. Okay, in the middle is a little illustration right off the Permatil or the Vole block website. And this particular illustration is showing what you can do if you have a plant in place. And what they're talking about here is that you dig a moat down around the plant that you're trying to protect and put essentially about a 2-inch moat of this gravelly Permatil or Vole block product around the plant. Now, needless to say, any soil amendment, whether it's lime or fertilizer or anything else, is always best incorporated at the time of installation. So if you are in an area where you're having vole problems and you're establishing beds, one of the ways to use this Permatil or Vole block product or other gravelly products that will have the same effect is to incorporate them and till them into the soil at the time that you are establishing the bed. Or you can also use them when you are installing the plants. And the way that they really recommend to use this product, if you're not going to put an extensive amount of it into a landscape bed, is to not just put it around the sides of the plant, but to also line the bottom of the hole as well, because of course, these voles can dig down, a foot or more, and so you can avoid having them come up from the bottom as well. So there are many benefits to having this permatill or vole block around the plant anyway, which include, allowing air spaces in the soil, allowing for good drainage, especially in clay soils, soil amendments. There's just many good reasons to do that, but particularly these gravelly products are also good for keeping voles away from your plants. And many commercial companies are going to this, especially where they're going to have maintenance contracts, because if they start losing plants to voles and they have to replace plants, that starts to get expensive. Homeowners are not happy with it. It's just easier to put this in as an upfront cost to the installation and get these products into the ground and pretty much stymie the moles before they ever get a chance to establish and feed on the plants. Now, these plant tubes, one of the things I'll say is that the two forms at the bottom, the two plastic tubes, the one on the left is commercially available type from very many different suppliers for protecting small trees. On the right is one, the homemade version made out of drain tile. Essentially, these aren't going to help you too much with the pine vole, but in this particular area which was a tree planting, there were significant above-ground problems with small mammals, probably not just meadow vole, but probably cotton rats as well.
And you give about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Anyway, the tubes will help you. Now, on the top, I show a wire barrier. This was used where there was below-ground damage, and essentially the secret to using this is to bury it significantly into the ground and protect the below-ground portions of plants. This may cause a problem in the future and may need to be removed once the plant's of size. Okay. Now, usually I don't recommend putting great blue herons out in habitat, but essentially people always ask me about cats. What about cats? And essentially, if you've got a barn and you've got mice, cats are okay. If you've got a house and you have mice, cats are okay. But out in the environment, cats are general predators, and the chances are they're going to be more interested in birds and mice and other things that are a little bit easier to get. That's not to say that they won't eat voles, but I don't think that we can really expect good vole control out of them, and so I certainly can't recommend cats as control mechanism, especially not compared to using something like the gravelly products in the planting. Now, trapping voles. Trapping voles is very easy, especially the pine vole, and apple and peanut butter are very good for trapping voles. And essentially what you do, you can just use regular mouse snap traps located near the holes that you find out in the planting. And one of the key elements here is to cover the trap with a large plant pot or a nursery liner and put a rock on top of it. There's 2 reasons for this. One, you're going to have voles coming out of the hole, and that's what you're trying to trap, and you're going to avoid non-target effects. The other thing that's going to occur is voles do not like to come out in the open, so if you cover that trap, they're going to feel very comfortable approaching it. Now, if you do this and you trap a vole, you might as well just go ahead and set that trap again and put it in the same place. You're likely going to trap another vole, especially if you're seeing plant damage. There's probably multiple voles there. If you trap another one, reset the trap, put it back in place. You're probably going to catch another one. Pine voles especially live out their lives within about 1,000 square feet. They're monogamous and they live in family groups, and so likely there's a whole family of voles living down the hole that you found. And so what I recommend is if you get a trap set, you're successful the first time, keep setting that trap until you run out of voles at that particular location. Now, Pine voles, of course, these are burrowing mammals, and another thing that you can do is you can dig up a portion of the tunnel, and you can put a trap in existing tunnels, that's shown here in the illustration. Again, they are not going to feel very easy coming out in the open. So what they generally, and of course there's many different ways that you can do this, but what they generally recommend is using a shingle or other flexible item. And a bucket would also be useful in this situation, or a pot. And the concept is that the bail of that trap is going to rise up probably deeper than the vole tunnel. So you want to allow room for that trap to actually work. Now, I would recommend baiting the traps, but essentially within the tunnels you can get away without even baiting the traps, because they're just going to come by and mechanically set that off and they're moving through the tunnels. But trapping is a very effective way, especially for pine voles. Now, the apple sign test is a good way to detect voles before damage occurs, and one of the things with wildlife, it's always good to assess, or any pest, is to assess the population, and then after you've been trapping for a while. And essentially the apple sign test, this is essentially trapping without the trap. You take some sort of bait, and the apples are really good because they show those little gnawing teeth marks, and you have a pretty good idea that what you're getting. You put a piece of apple down next to the vole hole, and you cover that with a nursery liner, pot, bucket, or something like that. Essentially, this keeps mice and squirrels and other things from coming up and chewing on the apple or removing it. And then you go back and you check that, and you see if you have some gnawing on it, and if you do, you can tell. If you do this and for a while, you'll get a little experience on. Well, if you get a few gnaw marks, you may just have one or two moles. But if all of a sudden those pieces of apple are disappearing, then you probably have a much higher population. If you do this several places within the landscape over the course of time, you'll get, especially where you have problems with voles, you'll get a pretty good idea of what your vole populations are like. So the apple sign test is an excellent way to judge your population without having to trap. I will also mention that when you're trapping anything, that you must check the traps once every 24 hours. So if you're going to trap, make sure that you get by and remove those dead animals, or make sure that it's just good trapping procedure, but in most cases is required by law when you're trapping anything. Now, I was going to move on to moles, but I understand that my time is about over here, and since moles of themselves could be an extensive presentation here, and I would guess now that I may be on for a future presentation, I'd be happy to take any questions. And so let's see, I have one here. Do plant roots move out from the amended zone area as readily as they would if there was not a change from amended to the surrounding soil? Okay, well, that's more or less a horticultural question. As far as I know, these soil amendments, I know that where I have used soil amendments in pots, that the plant roots readily grow through any of these plant amendments, and that there's nothing to really inhibit root growth through these amendments. And also remember that once this is in place, soil is going to permeate those the voids within that amendment. So it's not like a big hollow area there that roots are going to feel uncomfortable about growing into. I don't even see this as an issue whatsoever. Now, if you make this moat design, are roots going to grow out beyond that and possibly be subject to vole feeding? Well, I'd say yes, of course. And but the main thing is that you're not having the closer to the base of the plant that the damage occurs, the more probability that you are going to see a problem with the plant health. And this is true of insect damage or any kind of damage, disease damage, where you have the smaller roots. Those can be pruned extensively. Small roots die back when it's drought conditions. They actively grow again as soon as there's wet conditions. Most plants can take a significant amount of root pruning as long as it's not right near the base of the plant. What you really
Peter,
want to
we've
protect.
got time for one more quick question, and then we're going to have to move on. You definitely have an invitation to come back and talk to us about mold.
Is Rosol still legal? And do they trap better at certain times of the year?
Okay, yes, Rosol with the active ingredient chlorphacinone is still legal, and it is allowed for home use. And one of the key elements with about using Rosol is this, that it is a multi-feed bait, so you must use it several times, generally at 21 to 30-day intervals. Again, as with the trapping, you always want to cover the bait, and this is especially critical with baits because you do not want to have off-target effects. You want the voles and only the voles to feed on that toxic mammalian bait. And I see also, I'll include this in that answer because there's another question here. Do the traps work better at certain times of year? Many of the vole problems show up later in the year when the vole populations are higher, and trapping and also the baits work better in I'll say late fall, but essentially in the winter and early spring when other food items are less available. Because that makes the bait more attractive as a food item, and it makes the bait in the traps more desirable to, in other words, there's a good chance that they're going to head for the food and the bait rather than something else when food is lesser available in the environment.
Okay, so we have to cut to the next. Mark, that's not Mark.
Yep.
So just say thank you.
Okay, so that's about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Really appreciate all that great information. Next up, we have Danny Lauderdale, who has graciously agreed this morning to step in for Mark Blevins, who was called away at the last minute, and to give us an overview of the Showstopper plants. The Showstopper program is an attempt to promote plants that do really well in North Carolina. It's in partnership with the North Carolina Nursery and Landscape Association. Danny, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Lucy. I am fairly new to the Showstopper committee. As of this year, John Vining kind of recruited me and a few other folks. But as Lucy said, basically the plants are ones that we know do well pretty much all the way across North Carolina. The ones that are on there this year are 5, and actually every year there are 5 picked. There are usually 3 shrubs, a tree, and either a vine or a perennial is how it goes. And so these are, again, promoted through the North Carolina Nursery and Landscape Association through Extension. I think every office gets fact sheets on this, color fact sheets, that you can either give out at your office or distribute to garden centers as well. The 5 for this year include, if Lucy, you can go ahead and advance these for me.
Sure.
The first one that I believe we have is the winter series of camellias. And these are ones that do well from zone 6 to 9 in our state, so that gets us over into the mountains as well as here at the coast. And we all know that camellias do very well in partially shaded conditions. The next one on the list is the Japanese plum yew. Actually, Lucy has Kusa dogwood up next, which is fine. We can cover that. We know Kusa flowers later than our native flowering dogwood, flowers after the leaves emerge, and some are in bloom. Many are in bloom now here in Pitt County, do very well in partially shade or even in full sun, and to me are generally a little bit tougher than our native flowering dogwoods for certain situations. You can go to the next one. Climbing hydrangea, a good deciduous vine for us, a really woody vine with a very upright structure, a very stiff structure to it. It will climb up an arbor or structure. It can be trained against the wall and will have aerial roots and has white flowers in the summer, and is actually, I found it to be, once established, a very drought tolerant plant as well. Japanese plum yew, another good one, great substitute for Taxus. The other yews, Japanese plum does great in a partially shaded or full shaded situation, but it will grow in full sun as well. Again, very drought tolerant. A lot of different forms with this plant. The one that's on here on the plant list is Prostrata, which is more of a spreading type, but there are rounded forms and there are upright forms of Japanese plum yew as well. Venus sweet shrub, a good alternative to our native sweet shrubs. This one has a much larger flower and a white flower versus we're used to seeing on sweet shrubs the kind of maroon or reddish flowers on those. So this one pops and shows a little bit more than some of our native sweet shrubs, but great for a partially shaded situation, maybe even in full sun if it's got plenty of soil moisture, but a good deciduous shrub for us with these great large white flowers. You can go on, Lucy. Okay, so I think that's all of the plants, and again, it's just a way for us to promote plants that grow well in North Carolina, and the plants that are typically picked are ones that we hope will be fairly widely available throughout the state. I know that's always an issue. You recommend plants in your area, and then people come and say, you can't find them at our garden center. So just use this to encourage your garden centers to stock these plants as ones that will do well in your area.
Thank you, Danny.
You're welcome.
Next up, David Stephan from the Department of Entomology talking about current issues with insects.
All right, thank you. Just before I start, I'd like to add a personal observation to what Pete was talking about with the pine voles and meadow voles. I'm from upstate New York originally, where we had lots of meadow voles, very few pine voles, and in the winter they would move out of their fields and into lawns, so when the snow melted in the spring, you'd see their runways crisscrossing your lawn all over the place, girdling shrubs sometimes, and they would even come several feet up into evergreen shrubbery sometimes in snowdrifts, just burrowing vertically up through the snow and do extensive damage. So that's an issue that people down here don't usually have to deal with. Okay, well, I'm going to move on here. I have just a kind of a mixture of things that we get come in at this time of year. And I'm going to start with something really bizarre. These are the horsehair worms, also known as the Gordian worms, the Gordiacea. And over the years, there's been confusion as to what these things actually were. Where did they belong in the scheme of classification? Some people thought they looked like nematodes. Other people thought they were something different. Currently, they're now placed in a phylum all of their own, the Nematomorpha, small group, only about 250 to 300 species worldwide. And they are parasites, but they're only parasites of arthropods. They're not parasites of vertebrates like, mammals, fish, birds, things like that. We do have some familiar species around here that you can be found in freshwater or in semi-terrestrial habitat, and they're usually parasites of orthopteran insects, crickets, grasshoppers, cockroaches, katydids, and their relatives. There are some marine nematomorphs. I don't know anything much about them except that they're parasites of crustaceans. These things do not have any sort of alternate or intermediate host the way many other kinds of parasites do. They lay their eggs, and the tiny hatching larvae have to find their way directly back to some orthopteran host of the appropriate species. They range in size from maybe about 10 inches long as adults up to several feet long, and I would love to see one of those giant ones sometime and see what it comes out of. But they can be usually found in water. Only people find these things in, say, puddles, in pet water bowls indoors. They might even be found in a toilet or a sink or a bathtub if somebody's tossed a squashed cockroach in there, for example, or if an insect has gotten into water and died. And but only the larval stage does the feeding. The adults do not feed at all. Once they emerge from the body of their host, they're simply there to reproduce and lay eggs. They do have male and female stages. Now, like some sort of science fiction alien creature, they somehow direct the insect toward water before it dies so that the horsehair worm can emerge in water and then they can find each other and mate and lay eggs. And I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought there for a moment. They're sometimes down on the farm. They would frequently get into horse troughs. Either grasshoppers or cockroaches would be attracted there and fall in, and people see these things wiggling in the water in the trough and thought that maybe a horse's hair had fallen in there and come to life. So that's probably where they got that name, horsehair worm. Okay, moving on, carpenter worms. This is an interesting group of moths. We don't often see them coming into the clinic here, and we don't often collect them either. They belong to a group of moths that are referred to collectively as the microlepidopterans, which of course means small lepidoptera. All these things are rather large. They're medium to large size, have wing spreads up to 3 inches or more in some cases. But it's a small group with about 45 species here in North America. Some of the larger species, such as the one pictured here, are wood borers, whereas some of the smaller species bore into the roots of perennial herbaceous plants. They don't usually come to lights or get attracted to baits, so they're difficult to collect. You may need to try to rear them out, have an infested tree or a section of a tree that's been cut out and try to rear the adults from that. In the Deep South, they may be able to complete their development as little as 1 year, but typically in the North, they may take 3 or even 4 years to complete their development. And on a couple of these slides, I've included a link. Excuse me a second. Okay, we got a new feature here. I'm sorry, I was a little confused by. But on some of these slides, we've got including links to some of the insect notes that we have in our entomology files online that you can go to find additional information. The female carpenter worm lays her eggs in the bark of the tree, and at first the young larvae feed under the bark, but then they start boring into the sapwood. And as they get larger and older, they may bore as deep, even entering the heartwood of the tree and causing extensive damage. Now this damage is not usually visible on the surface. You don't see a whole lot of sawdust or bleeding from wounds on the tree trunk, but they can be in there doing a lot of damage. The tree may not be killed, but its lumber potential is severely damaged. When the larva is mature, it will pupate within one of the tunnels in the wood closer to the surface, facing outwards. And as the adult is preparing to emerge, the pupa will then wiggle its way to the surface and protrude from the trunk, and then the adult will split the skin of the larval exuvium and emerge. So here are some empty pupal skins or exuvii that were sent in. See, they're about 1 inch to 1.5 inches, almost 2 inches long in some cases. This is a close-up of one of the exuvii. The head would be here on the left, and the tail end would be on the right. And you can see these little spines here. There's actually 2 rows of them on each abdominal segment. And they use these spines to help push their way through the gallery toward the surface. There are pupae of many other kinds of insects, some other kinds of moths, some beetles, even some flies that are either in soil or in wood, and they use various kinds of armatures like this, little spines on the body to help them get a grip and push their way through the soil or the wood so that the adult itself doesn't have to scramble through. Instead, the hard exterior of the pupal exuvium takes the brunt of any wear and tear as it works its way toward the surface. Now, this particular species is called the little carpenter worm, and I collected this one just last week in my own yard. I saw it sitting on the foundation of my house one evening, and when I first saw it, I thought, well, this looks like a sphinx moth that has just emerged from its pupa and has crawled up on the foundation to let its wings hang down so they could expand and then it could fly away. But as I took a closer look at it, I realized, no, that is not a sphinx moth, that is a carpenter worm. And of course, then I started worrying about the oak trees in my yard, but probably don't need to worry too much. This one is not a very commonly collected species. We only have about 6 specimens in the insect collection. It is very similar to the larger and much more commonly collected carpenter worm, the Prionoxystus rabinii, which we do have a couple dozen specimens in the collection. The adults of this little carpenter worm have been collected in North Carolina from, say, April to July. Some of the reported hosts of this species include ash and maple and oak. And it's important you do not confuse this species with the lonesome dove carpenter worm, Prionoxystus larry-mcmurtrii. Okay, cankerworms are caterpillars that belong to the family Geometridae. And I believe I covered geometrids a little bit before, but go over them again as a reminder. Geometrids are commonly called, the adults are called geometers. The caterpillars are often called inchworms, spanworms, cankerworms because of their similar crawling habits and their similar bodily features. It's a very large family of moths, one of the largest families of all, probably tens of thousands of species in the world, and many of them are serious pests of ornamental trees, fruit trees, and forest trees, especially in the north, but in landscape trees they can cause a lot of damage too. Now, not all of the geometrids that we call cankerworms are closely related, but they do have some similar habits and features. And some of these include, they have one generation per year. The adults emerge from their pupae in the fall or the winter here in central North Carolina. And the females are wingless or have very short wings, a condition known as being brachypterous. The males have fully developed wings and look more or less like normal moths. Now, this particular species is the fall cankerworm, which here emerges in North Carolina. Usually in November, December is when I see the adult males coming to light, and occasionally I'll find the females on trunks of trees or on walls. It's a very common species throughout much of the eastern United States. It's been reported from a wide range of tree species, at least 20 different genera of trees. But looking down the host list, it seemed like many species of prunus are listed more so than most other trees. So prunus is the cherries, the plums, peach, probably among their favorite host trees. The larvae have been active in March and April here in the Raleigh area and have probably gone pretty much by now to pupate in the soil or on in the litter on the ground. Now, one of the features that distinguishes the larva of the fall cankerworm from other species of cankerworms, and I'm sorry I forgot to mention, let me go back to the previous slide a second. Even though these larvae are a very different color, this one is more or less green and this one is mostly blackish, but it's all the same species, just individual color variation within the same species. If I were to look closely at this, I would see the striped lines on the body. The color pattern is pretty much the same from one larva to the next, and so it's all the same species despite the color differences. The larva of the fall cankerworm is relatively undistinguished as cankerworms or geometrid larvae go, but one thing about it is unique. Virtually all, perhaps all other geometrid larvae have only two pairs of prolegs. They have one pair of anal prolegs here at the very tip of the abdomen, and then on the sixth abdominal segment they have one other pair of abdominal prolegs. And that's true for most, if not all, other geometrid larvae, but the fall cankerworm, you can make it out here, has a rudimentary pair of additional prolegs on the fifth abdominal segment. And that is a pretty reliable character for separating the larvae of the fall cankerworm out from any other species of cankerworm we might have here in North Carolina. Now, this is an ornamental cherry tree growing on campus right here at NC State, and this is where I collected all these cankerworms. As you can see, this tree was almost completely defoliated by the cankerworm larvae. I don't know if they've been there in previous years. I hadn't noticed them. But there are a couple of other cherry trees, same cultivar, within just a few feet of this one that were attacked but not nearly so heavily damaged. So why it was chance or something about this particular tree that made it much more attractive to the cankerworms, maybe just more females crawled up that tree and laid their eggs there. We don't know. In addition to the species or cultivar of a tree, its location in the landscape may have something to do in cases as to why it's so heavily attacked. Many insects prefer to lay their eggs either on trees in shade or in the sun or maybe at the forest edge transition area. Some insects prefer to lay trees on saplings, others prefer mature trees. So there are a lot of features that go into determining why certain trees may be attacked and not others. You can often get mixed population of two or more different species of cankerworms on the same tree. Now, in addition to the fall cankerworm, there are several species in the genera Aranus, Paleacrita, and Phagelia, which also occur in North Carolina and which are cankerworms. In fact, in particular, Paleacrita vernata is known as the spring cankerworm, and the adults of these species emerge from January to March here in central North Carolina. Again, I've collected the males at lights on numerous occasions, and sometimes I get to find the females when they've crawled up on tree trunks or other surfaces. Most species of cankerworms will feed on a wide range of tree genera. A few of them may be a little more specialized. And there is an introduced species, and I didn't dig out some images of it, but it's called the winter moth, Operoptera, I believe that's pronounced, brumata. It's from Europe. It is present in the Northeast, but it has not yet reached North Carolina. Now, as you know, in nature, if there is something to be eaten, and sooner or later something will come along and eat it. So imagine you're a cankerworm, sitting on a branch somewhere, eating away happily, and all of a sudden you feel a strange vibration in the branch, and you look up, and you see this bearing down on you. And you have just enough time to think, holy, and then it's too late. The beetle is upon you, and you're being munched up into a bug burger. So this is one of our caterpillar hunters of the genus Callosoma, and caterpillar hunters belong to a large family of beetles called the ground beetles, the Carabidae. There are something like 2,600 species of them just in North America alone, and probably about 40,000 species of them throughout the world. Most carabids are regarded as beneficial. They feed on other invertebrates, especially insects, but many of them also specialize in feeding on snails or slugs or other kinds of invertebrates like that. Probably some eat earthworms as well. But there are a handful of species that are pests feeding on small on seeds or on seedling plants. They can be pests in turf or in, say, newly planted crops. Of the caterpillar hunters in the genus Callosoma, at least 6 species of these are known to occur in North Carolina. This is probably our largest species of caterpillar hunter, the Callosoma scrutator. It's also one of the largest and most colorful species of carabid beetles in the United States. Adults can reach from an inch to almost an inch and a half long. The species occurs throughout North Carolina and can be found in most of the eastern United States. Both the larvae and adults of these caterpillar hunters are voracious predators on caterpillars, almost any kind of caterpillar really, including tent caterpillars, and I presume in the case of this native species, they also feed on the larvae of the gypsy moth. They're not really very well adapted for climbing. They're essentially ground-dwelling beetles, but they will climb. They've got it in their minds to do so, and they will climb up into trees or fly up in the trees and search for their prey there, and say feeding on caterpillars throughout the season. One species of caterpillar hunter, I think it's called the forest caterpillar hunter, Callosoma cytophanta, was introduced to the northeastern United States from Europe to help control the gypsy moth. And this species is a little more tied into the life cycle of the gypsy moth than the other species of Callosoma are. And adults and larvae are primarily active during the couple of months of the year when the gypsy moth caterpillars are out there, and then they actually will just kind of bury themselves in the soil and wait till the next year. And the caterpillar hunter adults are also kind of unusual among beetles, is that they can live for up to 3 or 4 years. Most beetles, the adults live for 1 season, they're gone, but some of these caterpillar hunters and other ground beetles can actually live multiple years. So this one, they say, is one of our largest and most colorful ground beetles. Another species that's also native to North Carolina, very similar in appearance, but Callosoma wilcoxi. And this species is considerably smaller, though, maximum length of about 1 inch long. It too can be found throughout most of the eastern United States. And see, these one group of caterpillar hunters are very colorful in bright green colors, whereas most other Callosomas are mostly black in color with maybe a few bright colorful highlights on them. This particular individual was actually found running down the hallway here in Gardner Hall a couple of weeks back, and I caught it and nursed it back to health. And just a week later, I caught the other specimen, the Callosoma scrutator, in the parking lot outside the building. I've never seen either of these on campus before, so I was able to feed them well on the fall cankerworms I was collecting on the cherry, and they performed very well in the lab for us. Okay, pit scales, shifting gears here. Scale insects, pit scales, the Astrolechinidae, a small family of scale insects, probably only about 17 species or so in the United States and maybe 4 species in North Carolina. Now this is a piece of a branch here infested with scale. This is not a scale itself, of course. We don't very often get pit scales submitted to the clinic. Say once every several years I'll get a sample come in. And this one came in from Dare County last week and had a really nice infestation. When the infestations are heavy like this, considerable damage may be done to the host plant. This was an American holly. A little bit closer up, this is the holly pit scale, Astrodiaspis pudianum, and the individual scales are within these pits in the bark that you can see here like this. But does the pit result from the scale insect sinking into the bark as it feeds, like the tissue underneath it collapses, or does the tissue grow up around the scale to partially enclose it, in effect producing a kind of gall? And if you look at structures like this, where you have almost a donut shape growing out of the bark, it does appear as if the tissue of the plant grows around the scale to partially enclose it, rather than the scale sinking into the bark. This is a close-up of from the same branch, and it's a mixture here of old and dead scales. So you got here's a dead one, this old brown test or shell covering the scale here. Here's one that's still transparent and green, and underneath that there would be a live scale. There's also a little red predatory mite here, but there's another live scale here. You have to get up close and look at these things, and the test that these scales secrete, so just like the shell that armored scales secrete, or the wax scales secrete, or the cottony fluff that the cottony scales secrete, it's a protection. Protects them from weather, protects them from natural enemies, and the living body of the scale, the vulnerable part, is hidden underneath. And the female will lay her eggs underneath this shell, and they'll be protected there until they hatch out. All right, wrong way. Just one more shot, extreme close-up of these holly pit scales. Same shot, you see the mite here, you see the living scale, and then you see some old brown dead tests here. I don't why we don't get more of these in. I don't know. They're fascinating, but I guess people should be grateful if they don't have problems with them. This is from the same shrub, the same American holly, and in addition to the pit scales, this shrub also had a heavy infestation of cottony scales, pulmonaria species, and some whitefly pupae on there, probably a species in the genus Tetralurodes. And here you can see, not very clearly I'm afraid, some of the parasitized nymphs of the cottony scale, the pulmonaria, which had overwintered on the leaf, and then they died as they'd been parasitized. At this point in time, the adult cottony scales had already laid their eggs, produced their ovisacs, but between the two species of scales, we get this thick growth of sooty mold. And as most of you probably know, sooty mold is a fungus that grows on the sugary honeydew produced by homopteran insects like scales and aphids and whiteflies, and doesn't actually parasitize the plant itself. However, if the sooty mold is thick enough, it can probably retard some of the photosynthesis going on with the plant and reduce the plant's vigor, perhaps stress the plant. Normally it would be washed away by rain, or insects would clean up some of the honeydew. Flies, yellow jackets, moths, butterflies, beetles are all attracted to honeydew and feed on it to some extent. All right, last thing here, and I'll wrap it up. We got juniper webworm. This is a Galachiid moth. It is one of the leaf tire moths, and the larvae will be feeding on the needles of junipers, and they don't prefer all junipers equally well. They have some definite preferences, and Jim Baker covers that a little bit in his note. You see the link there at the bottom of the screen. This species has one generation a year, at least here in North Carolina. You get the larvae completing their development in the spring, starting about now and continuing into May or June. And then the adults emerge, lay their eggs, and start the process over again. When I was The adult moth is about a ½ inch long when the wings are closed. It's got a brown and white stripe pattern on the wing that camouflages very well when it's hiding among the needles. In fact, when I was taking this picture a couple of days ago, I did shake an adult out of the foliage, and it flew off and landed elsewhere on the plant. A little bit closer up shows the communal nest that some of the larvae will spin. When they first hatch from their eggs, they will feed as leaf miners within the needles, feed individually, but as they get older, they may come together and form sort of a communal nest, kind of like a miniature, well, not exactly, a miniature tent caterpillar nest. And you get several larvae in there, and eventually the larvae will pupate within these silken galleries. And they're pretty well protected in there from marauding wasps, yellow jackets that might try to get at them. But there are certainly going to be their natural enemies, old parasitic wasps, that are able to penetrate those silken galleries and find them and parasitize them. Not a great picture here, unfortunately, but this shows where I found them. And you have two different cultivars of juniper literally in contact with each other. And the variety on this side is growing in a yard near campus here. This is where I got the pictures of the heavily infested plants. The one on the right, not a single sign of any of the juniper webworm in this cultivar. And I've seen this elsewhere too, where there were multiple cultivars of juniper planted in front of small businesses along a street. And one cultivar might be heavily attacked, and the other cultivars, not at all, nothing going on. Okay, I threw this one last shot in because I just like the look of the shot, but it doesn't show any particularly great damage. You see some more of the webbing here in the background, and then some damage here along this stem, and also new shoots, the buds starting to come out. Okay, I've gone through this fairly quickly. I just wanted to, so as to leave time for the other folks. We had a message from Cindy Lauderdale, wanted us to mention the oak Lacanian scales that were present out there right now, and also the azalea bark scale that they were seeing. I didn't have time to grab up some images of that and write some text for it. But the oak Lacanian scales are already done for the year. The females have matured, they've laid their eggs, and now what you're seeing are the dead brown post-reproductive females stuck on the branches. They have laid their eggs, which are being protected under the dead body of the scale insect, and the eggs will hatch out, and little crawlers will spread out on the leaves to spend the summer there. I'm not sure what stage the azalea bark scales are in right now. They're probably similar. You probably got adults laying eggs right now. And I haven't had any good examples of that come in so far this spring, but I am sure that they are out there in numbers. Okay, do we have any questions about any of the stuff we're going over or other things?
All right, thanks, Dave.
All right, thanks,
Really
Dave.
appreciate that.
Really appreciate that.
So I think Mike's going to introduce Sean and Emma for us.
Right. This is Mike Munster, and we had, as you may have heard, the announcement of the first discovery of laurel wilt disease and the red bay ambrosia beetle in North Carolina just this month. There was a very nice webinar that was done, a bit long. It was 50 minutes long. But what I wanted to do was, since a lot of you folks were not on that particular webinar, and the recording actually is available, let me give you the link to the recording. But since a lot of you weren't on that, I asked Sean Butler here, who's also in the clinic, if he could do a reprise and an update of the presentation he did for agents on this particular disease and its vector. So let me turn it over to Sean.
Thanks, Mike. As Mike said, I'm Sean Butler, and Emma is also on here because she did a lot of the work on putting the slides together way back when, so only fair. As Mike said, many of you, even if you had not attended the webinar, may have seen it in the North Carolina Pest News, and the Department of Entomology, Steve Bambera and Stephen Frank had a write-up on the disease and the beetle as well. So And Steve, just put that up. Okay. Well, just the introduction to the disease and its vector, Raffaella lauricola, and it's a state of ophiostoma, which is the infamous fungus involved in Dutch elm disease. So the mechanism is similar, and basically the beetle carries the fungus to the host and bores into the host, and the fungus gets planted into the host, and as the fungus grows, it clogs up the xylem, causing wilting symptoms initially. And here are the known hosts that are susceptible. They're on the Lauraceae family. And I'll take the opportunity here, and Mike had asked, which was good of him, to mention that mountain laurel, cherry laurel, they're not true laurels, and they're not susceptible, nor is rhododendron, etc. Red bay is the host it was found on in March or April, either end of March or early April this year. This map is not updated, but as you see, North Carolina, it was found in these 4 counties. These 4 counties where they adjoined is where the hotspot was found. And the location is quite a distance from the last detection, which was in South Carolina, Horry County. So it's believed that this could be man-made or man movement of wood, and that is the major concern about the spread of this disease complex, is that it's going to be moved with firewood or just wood debris from one county to the next. So red bay is actually it goes quite a ways inland in North Carolina. It's in the southeast, all the way down through Florida, and even into Texas. And many people just assume it is river bottom or on the coast, but it does go, into the upland some as well. And some of these trees, although it's an understory on the coast, it can take on a pretty good sized tree. The other major host here is sassafras, which is all throughout North Carolina. It's also all the way up into New York and New England, and all the way down into the south, so it has a very large range. Red bay, it's important to note that it's a food source for deer, bear, turkey, the berries are, and there's also a swallowtail butterfly, which it appears to be the only food source for the larvae, and Dave will correct me here because luckily for me I have an entomologist right here beside me.
It's the Palamedes swallowtail is may feed exclusively on bay genus Persea, and also the spicebush swallowtail is going to feed on other plants in Lauraceae as well.
Some of the less, I can't say they're less important, but these do all occur in North Carolina as well, but to much lesser extent, and you can see that one's heavily endangered and the other one is threatened. These are on the coast of North Carolina. So I haven't really introduced the beetle up until this slide, but the red bay ambrosia beetle, Dileverus glabratus, vectors the fungus, and red bay here is the host where you see it on. So this is a pretty progressed infection, but it's a pretty diagnostic feature. So the Forest Service, for example, is recommending that you do this if you have a dying red bay, and you don't want to do it on a tree that's just got a little bit of a wilt or something, because you're going to end up killing the tree anyway doing this. But if you have a red bay that's in poor condition and you see all this vascular streaking through the vascular system, then it's highly likely that's what the problem is. A couple more hosts here that it occurs on. California Bay does not occur in North Carolina. The disease cycle is basically that the beetle, female beetle, emerges from a dead or a dying red bay and flies to a healthy red bay, and it can only take perhaps just one burrow to implant the fungus, which is in the mycangia of the beetle. And the beetle uses the fungus as a food source for the larvae. And the larvae will feed on it and mature, and the cycle, they'll exit the dead tree and move to another healthy tree. And these are some frass tubes, exit tubes, that you'll see a picture of in another slide that may or may not be present on an infested plant. And this is a heavy infestation, and that plant was structurally very damaged, but that's what the galleries look like in the larvae. Here are the frass tubes. And some general symptoms of progressed infection, the vector, and the vascular streaking. It is limited to the xylem of the plant, which is the water-conducting tissue generally in all plants. So the fungus here is just clogging up the vascular system, and so the top of the plant will wilt, and eventually the plant will die. It's not getting nutrients put up there with water as well. One of the most important economically, the most economically important host is avocado, and it's in Florida, and there's an industry down there for that. So it's a large concern in Florida. There appear to be some cultivars that have resistance. So the management options, the Forest Service in the webinar basically said that it's not feasible to try to stop or eradicate the disease. It was attempted a few years ago in South Carolina. The first report of the beetle was in 2002 in Georgia, and it wasn't until 2004, 2005 that red bays it was noticed that red bays were declining, and the beetle was recovered from these. It's also important to note that there are several, and I'm talking entomology here, so entomologists, you can turn off your volume, I guess. But there are several ambrosia beetles that will bore into red bays. And there are also other ambrosia beetles that will produce frass tubes. So I wouldn't say that's a diagnostic that red bay ambrosia beetle is in the plant. But once you see the vascular discoloration, that's a good symptom that it's there. The recommendation by the Forest Service is that the beetle, since the beetle will progress about 20 miles annually, and the beetle is also the only known vector for the disease, that it's not feasible to try to control other than try to just slow the progression of the disease. And that really is to leave infested and infected wood on your site. So if you have a declining red bay, dispose of it by, you could bury it, you could burn it, according to whatever your local regulations are, or just cut it up and leave it on site. They don't want you to move firewood. And as I said, I think that it's believed that this North Carolina find this month was probably due to somebody moving wood. If you think you have laurel wilt, this is what you should do. You should contact the Forest Service. Ryan Bladow is the regional forester, and also the expert on laurel wilt for the Forest Service in North Carolina. So you can call, or you can go to this email address right here, and that's for any threats to North Carolina agriculture, forestry, etc. So you can report anything to here, and they will investigate it for you. They'll send out a forest ranger, or they might ask you for some photos, etc. That's the first place to go. And of course, the plant clinic can diagnose laurel wilt as well as most all diseases, but it's best to go through the process of the Forest Service. They'll make site visits before you move wood. And also a side-by-side comparison. Mike put this together, which is another good idea. I didn't talk about thousand cankers. Mike did speak about that last year. So there's a comparison here. They're both transmitted by ambrosia beetles, different genera. And laurel wilt affects plants in the Lauraceae family. And as you can see, thousand cankers affects in Euglins genus. So not all plants in each area are affected. Not all plants in this genus are affected. Not all plants in this family are affected. This one's in Tennessee as of last fall, so now it's the time that we're really going to be looking, the Forest Service especially, and the NCDA will be looking for symptoms because trees obviously are leafing out. In the winter is not a good time to be looking. It takes many more beetles to produce disease. For thousand cankers, it takes a heavy infestation, and it's believed that only one beetle can start an infection with laurel wilt. Also, thousand cankers, these are pretty shallow borings, and they're pretty much just under the bark. So last fall, NCDA had recommended that if any wood is moved into North Carolina, it has to at least have been stripped of bark. But in this case, you couldn't do that because these galleries go deep into the wood. So that's another major difference. The resource links. Information about laurel wilt and also thousand cankers actually, and several other important diseases and pests. Okay. Are there any questions?
Comments?
Thanks for that comment. It is a good idea to sterilize the pruning tube. That's right. You don't want to go from tree to tree and possibly transmit the fungus from one plant to the next. Another question was from Louise. Is there a hazard to transplanting sassafras from the coast? Well, sassafras is I don't know. I didn't know that people were transplanting sassafras. You'll have to check. You definitely check with the Forest Service, that slide that I showed, and ask them about movement sassafras. I don't know of any kind of regulation on that. You can get sassafras all over the state to Louisiana, and you can probably just go a little bit to the west.
I'm just going to. I'm going to guess that since the beetles would probably prefer trees above a certain diameter, that if you were just moving seedlings or very small saplings, there might be a much lower risk that they could be infected. But I'm not sure about that. I guess we can check with the Forest Service and find out.
And feeding off that comment by Dave, also the nursery industry is not being regulated for it either. For that reason, it's not believed to. The beetle is not believed to bore into seedlings so far. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Thanks. Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sean. I just want to put the link for the full-length Illuminate session that Ryan Blado did again in the chat box there, because I think I had sent it only to Lucy and don't know if it went out to the group as a whole. As far as diseases, let me just do a very quick run through of some of the things that you're likely to be seeing this time of year. And I always like to make these interactive. Let's see who first gets to type in what they think this disease is. The tree pictured on the upper panels is ornamental pear. Maybe the one in the upper right I think is actually for fruit pear, and an apple in the lower right. And everybody's coming in with the correct answer here. Yes, this is fire blight caused by the bacterium Erwinia amylovera. Here's a picture of a tree with a very heavy infection. And a quick question. True or false? Peaches and nectarines are susceptible to fire blight. Click your green check if you think that's true, and your red X if you think that's false. All right, and the majority is right. It is false. Peaches and nectarines are not susceptible to fire blight. They get a couple of other bacterial problems, but many other woody rosaceous plants do get fire blight, such as apple, crabapple, cotoneaster, pyracantha, and of course most susceptible would be pear. In fact, large branches, and I've even read that entire trees of susceptible types of pear can be killed. Again, this is caused by a bacterium. It's spread both by rain splash and by insects, including bees. And Ann Edwards commented about how many bees are out and about this time of year. And so now is the time when we're going to be seeing some new infections by fire blight. And it enters, the bacterium does, through both wounds, such as hail or pruning wounds, and through natural openings, such as the nectaries at the base of flowers. It overwinters as the bacteria, again, overwinters in cankers on trees. You can see here the edge of a canker on this branch, also in bugs and twigs. And then the first part of the plant to be infected is the flower, so we get a blossom blight. But then it can move from the blossom down into the spurs and the twigs, or you can get a secondary inoculum produced, the bacterial ooze, on that dead spur and the infection of stems or even fruit from there. Management of fire blight includes pruning. The easiest way to do that is to go through and prune out all the shepherd's crooks, the cankers that you find during the dormant season. Make sure you go, I believe the recommendation is 6 inches into good wood if you're doing in the dormant season. Or you can, if you have a small tree or a few, you can try and stay ahead of it by keeping the cankers that you see appear during the growing season, pruned out, but try and stay a good 10 inches or 12 inches ahead of the dead wood in that case. Streptomycin sprays are also used at bloom and are labeled. The case with homeowners, though, is that you're not usually going to be in a situation to have the equipment necessary to spray an entire tree, especially some of these large ornamental pears. And there are some less susceptible cultivars than others when we talk about the fruiting trees. If you see our fruit disease information note number 3, you can get information there. Since our time is up, I'm going to go ahead and just make a quick mention of the fact that some of you may have heard of that there were transplants of a couple kinds of squash found in the Charleston area with downy mildew, cucurbit downy mildew. But this has not been found in North Carolina at this point. There is no knowledge that we have that it was sold, infected transplants were sold to any of the big box stores in North Carolina. But do keep an eye on it. I would recommend reading the blog that Sue Colucci did. We paste the link here. Regarding this particular find, and also a link to her last year blog about the importance of not bringing problems home with your transplants in general. So let's see. Yes, again, Tom, these will be put on the site that Lucy provides with the PowerPoints that we always do.
Mike, I would just intervene to say that while it is 12 o'clock and we normally try to end at 12, we are not getting bumped off at 12. So those of you who want to stay, Mike, if you have time to stay and go through the rest of your program, I'm sure there's people who would be interested.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. For those of you who have to sign off, thank you for joining us, and I hope that no one suffered serious damage or injury from the storms 10 days ago. All right, for those who can stay then, I will pose this question. What caused these holes in the cherry laurel leaves? Let's change it over to a letter selection. Click on the letter which you think correctly answers the question as to whether caterpillars, beetles, fungi, bacteria, or hailstones caused the injury. All right. Oh, interesting. Actually, in this case, the majority, let's see, I have to add them up. No, the majority does not have it this time. These are neither caterpillars, beetles, nor hailstones, nor micrometeorites that we like to conjure up when we can't come up with another diagnosis. This is, in fact, either caused by, most likely, a fungus or a bacterium. If you were to have seen these spots earlier, you would have noticed a reddish-brown leaf spot, and then a cork layer forms around it. You can see it a little bit right here where one is developing. It's the plant's way of walling off the infection, and then it drops out. This is often the case in prunus, but it's not exactly diagnostic because there are a couple of bacteria, a couple of different fungi, a phytoplasm, at least one virus, and even abiotic factors that can cause this to happen. And of course, with the spot dropping out, you lose the evidence of what it was that caused it. But let me just mention a couple of the more common ones, the causes of shot hole and prunus in general. One would be a bacterial leaf spot, the bacterium xanthomonas, and another is a fungus called, among other things, Blumeriella jappii. It actually has about 3 other names, 2 different forms that you might see, and it's a little bit confusing, but we'll just call it cherry leaf spot or Blumeriella leaf spot. These leaves here are from last year, actually, no, 2 years ago now, a prunus avium that came in from a nursery in Buncombe County. With Blumeriella, which is what's pictured here, it affects a lot of prunus species and causes everything from spots to yellowing to leaf drop, as well as the shot hole symptom that we're mentioning. While we're on the subject of prunus, we got a picture of this particular disease last week, from here in Wake County. This is not the actual picture, it's from our archives, but I imagine most people will be able to name this. See if you can type it in either to the whiteboard or to the chat box if you know it. Yes, Amanda. Okay. Curly leaf? Well, close. Leaf curl, peach leaf curl is the name of the disease. A simple fungus that produces the symptoms named Tephryna deformans. And as it turns out, by the time you see this, it's too late to do anything about it. It can become severe enough to cause leaf drop, but the leaves are only susceptible to infection while they are emerging and expanding. So once the leaves are hardened off, they're no longer susceptible, and subsequent growth should be okay. For example, if you got a lot of defoliation and you had a new flush of growth. And it turns out that what you need to do here is make a single application. One of the things you could use would be a fixed copper or Bordeaux mixture, something like that, but before bud break, and that will take care of this. When you're talking to people about their peaches and nectarines, just remind them that these are sort of the high maintenance friends of the home garden and do require a full program of sprays and pruning and fertilization and care so that we can get the production that we want out of them. These are plants here, a very interesting story, and I see that you're logged on Onslow County, but some plants that the Master Gardener program had produced there for sale, and they got these spots on the leaves and were concerned whether they had in particular bacterial leaf spot, and if so, of course they weren't going to want to sell them. So the question was, and the question I pose to you, would you buy these plants? Well, the short answer is we couldn't tell from the pictures. They didn't look quite right. The pictures of the tomatoes looked fine. They just looked like abiotic problems. The peppers, we weren't sure and really wanted to see a physical sample, which they quickly sent to us. And here's a closer view here. It turned out that it was not something to worry about, that this is an abiotic problem. I'm mostly suspecting it might be something like magnesium deficiency. And we noticed that the salt levels were very low in the soil, so the fertilization wasn't what it needed to be. But I couldn't find any bacteria in any of the spots I checked, even though they are a little angular and do look a little bit suspicious. So since we're talking about bacterial spot, that was the concern here, and here's a photograph of it. You can see it does look a little similar to what we were looking at there. These are caused by what are now recognized as several species of the genus Xanthomonas, and it turns out that there are different strains, some that are only going to affect pepper, some that are only going to affect tomato, and some that will affect both. And the main thing that I wanted to get across here was the fact that these can be seed transmitted. And once you get a seedling infected with the bacterium in the crowded conditions of a greenhouse during transplant production, it can spread quickly among those plants and then be brought out into the field or the garden. Here are some examples of the symptoms on tomato, with the leaf spots becoming quite severe, and as in pepper, it can affect the fruit. But remember, there are a lot of things that can cause leaf spots, especially on tomato. And does anybody recognize what these are on the right and on the left? Let's do a hand raise here. I haven't done that particular tool for a while. All right, let's see. All right, Tom, what do you think? All right, we're not hearing audio. Oh, he's typing into his chat box here. Early blight or septoria. All right, that's very good. The picture on the left here is in fact septoria leaf spot, not early blight, which would be alternaria. But that is septoria. And the one on the right, anybody know what it is on the right? No, that is actually tomato spotted wilt virus. So basically the message I want to get across here is that looking at a leaf spot, unless you've got a lot of experience with tomato, can be tricky to diagnose. One of the other points I want to make about this is that this is a disease that loves water. So rain, irrigation, especially driving rains, wind-blown rains that will saturate the intercellular spaces of the leaves. These really help bacteria along. And once it's going in the field, if the weather's favorable, there's nothing you can do about it. You could probably do some copper sprays, but again, if the weather's against you, then it's going to be a losing battle. And of course, there are some strains now that are resistant to copper. There is some genetic resistance available in tomato and pepper varieties, but to tell you the truth, I do not know if they are available in the ones for the home garden market. And I wanted to conclude here, and I had mentioned this already with the little postcard that cucurbit downy mildew sent us from Charleston this month, and to be alert for the signs and symptoms of this particular disease, which would be typically angular, first yellow, and then a tannish dead leaf spot on the cucurbits with, if the conditions are moist, with the formation of a sort of a pale bluish, purplish fuzz on the underside where the organism is sporulating. And with that, I'll take any questions. All right, well, thank you for your patience and sticking around the extra minutes here, and I'll turn it back to Lucy.
I posted a lot of announcements into the chat as we went along, so just want to remind you quickly about all of the wonderful social media opportunities there are through the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic. They have a great website, the blog, Facebook page, Twitter, all of those are sharing super timely information. So take a look at these links, and those are linked from the Plant Pests and Pathogens page, so you can get that there as well. We have a lot of upcoming events. We have a garden calendar online that you guys can post information that you want to go to the public. We have one that's just for general gardening information, and we have one that's for community gardening events. These are all linked through Google, so people can really quickly just click on it and add to their own calendar, so they don't have to copy all the information or any of that. And you can post. So check out those links, and you can help populate those calendars with information. Wilson County Garden Tour is coming up. Hope you're all going to be at the NC State Extension Master Gardener Conference in Raleigh. Incredible program lined up, outstanding speakers, lots of great opportunities. Just after that is the Inside the Beltline Tour to Coop, which is a tour of backyard chicken coops inside the Beltline in Raleigh. So you can follow that link for more information about those coops. And the Native Plant Conference is going to be at Western Carolina in July. So we can Google that and get more information about the conference. As always, I encourage you to watch Almanac Gardener and In the Garden with Bryce Lane. And hope you guys have a good month, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. Louise says that the North Carolina Conference can really use some help in the silent auction. Please encourage folks to contact me or Bob Kellum. So if any of you guys who would be willing to donate items to the silent auction, we would appreciate that tremendously. That would be great. Okay, any other quick announcements anybody has to share? I need people to help run it. Oh, so Louisa said she needs some volunteers during the conference. So if you're coming to the conference and we'll be willing to help run the silent auction during the times that we have the vendor section open, that would be super. Many thanks for your help with that. All right, take care, and we'll see you next time.